There are hundreds of reverbs out there, but there's one specific one that has defined the sound of my orchestral mixes. It's called Cinematic Rooms Professional by Liquid Sonics, and honestly, I think it's the last reverb I'll ever need. Okay, so this is what my template looks like. I'm working on this project here. It's still sort of a work in progress, but this is my ultimate template, and if you're interested in this, you can check it out at ernestocomposer.com/templates if you want. But let me pull up the reverb here. This is Cinematic Rooms, which I picked up a few years ago, and this is my go-to reverb for my template. This is the one that lives in my template and is used across at least every single orchestral stem and a few stems beyond that as well. So why do I use Cinematic Rooms? In my opinion, it sounds really lush. It can sound incredibly realistic. It can sound very unrealistic and, do all kinds of weird creative sort of sounds too. And not even just for orchestral music, but for anything that needs to be in a space of some kind. It's also pretty future-proof because it has capabilities for surround and Dolby Atmos, which means that if my projects ever get to that point in the future, I won't need to switch to anything else. Cinematic Rooms Professional is capable of those workflows. And I also love its versatility. Like I mentioned, it can be a nice big hall sound, but it could also be a tight space. It's also very easily used for post-production sound if you do that kind of thing. So there are presets for like stairwells or for just basic rooms, small rooms, medium rooms, whatever you need. There are a bunch of presets that you can select from and then continue to dial in the sound from there. So I got Cinematic Rooms after I was able to take a mentorship with composer Trevor Morris. And in that mentorship, he was taking us through his template and how he suggests we build our own. And this is the reverb that he uses and the one that he recommended to all of us, which actually he got turned on to from a legendary score mixer, Alan Meyerson. Told him about this, he started using it, and this is just the one that he uses and is now the one that I use as well. So I've been using it for the past 4 years or so since that mentorship. By the way, if you're a Logic Pro user and you're trying to make music for media, whether if that's film, television, video games, podcasts, production music, whatever it is, I'm building a brand new resource called Logic Pro for media composers. There's currently a waitlist open for it. If you're just interested, want to know when it launches, you want to get a discount when it launches, go and check that out. Sign up for the waitlist at logicformedia.com. There will be way more details concerning that kind of thing, but it's going to be a full in-depth guide to using Logic Pro's powerful tools and settings and just hidden features and shortcuts and building your own template and how to utilize a reverb properly. All of that sort of thing that's relevant to media composition, we're going to go over in that. So go and check it out, sign up for the waitlist, and all right, let's get back to the video. Now, a little bit about Cinematic Rooms. Cinematic Rooms is an algorithmic reverb, meaning that it's reverb, it's mathematically produced. It's not a convolution reverb or trying to one-to-one match a real space that exists. This isn't an IR reverb or impulse response reverb. This is purely algorithmic. And that gives you a lot of control over the sound. You can change the decay times and the early reflections and the pre-delay, and all of that stuff is really malleable because it just changes the mathematics of the reverb to get you a different sound. So it's very flexible in that regard. Okay, so let me show you how I have it set up now. The way my template is set up is, here's my mixer pulled up. So here we are in the strings folder. There are a few string channel strips, which I call submixes, which are for various things. So this one is the strings long bus with certain processing on it, strings short, strings pizzicato colegno effects, and strings solo. And you can see these bus sends are busing from here, these two channel strips, which this one holds Cinematic Rooms in what I call the long reverb. And this one, which is Cinematic Rooms again, but with slightly different settings for a short reverb. And basically what that does is for long style playing, for example, when violins are playing legato or something like that, a slightly longer reverb just really adds a lot of zhuzh to the sound. And because of the style I'm going for is very cinematic sounding. It sounds a little larger than life, a little bit more special, a little bit more, it just has a little bit more of that candy that cinematic music sort of has to it. And this is true for practically every other orchestral stem. In the woodwinds, we have the same sort of thing where we have a longer reverb and a shorter reverb. The shorter reverb might be like a second less in decay time compared to the long reverb, maybe a little less than a second. So not a dramatic difference. And the reason you would have a shorter reverb for the short articulations is because the short articulations don't last very long. And usually if you're using short articulations, you want them to sort of speak in a way that a long reverb might muddy up or blur a lot. So if you have a bunch of short sounds, the reverb doesn't then overwhelm the sound of what you're listening back to because of all that sound that's reverberating over and over again. Instead, there's a little bit of bloom to give it space and a sense of depth, but not an overwhelming amount. So that's why I have two different reverbs. There's also another way that you can use reverb that's pretty common in this style of music, and that's using the double reverb trick, which is basically having one reverb. Say I pull this up and you can select in the presets here a different kind of thing, like let's say I go to studios and then I go to stage. This orchestration studio sounds pretty good. That might resemble like a scoring stage. You could have all of your instruments in this orchestration studio reverb preset, for example. And what that does is just give you a sense of the room or the space. So you put all your reverbs like that, and then you have a secondary reverb that you then add on top of that, which has a little bit more of a tail and not really like the sound of early reflections or a room reverb. And that can really help make instruments sound cohesive if you say have a library that's very dry, or you have various different libraries across your orchestra that are from different library makers, for example, that sound quite different from each other. Putting them in the same room and then putting another reverb on top of that, that's not a lot, but just like has a little bit of a tail after the fact, makes everything sound much more cohesive. Now, the reason I don't do that is because the orchestral libraries I do use have a large amount of a hall sound already baked into them, and I like that sound. So it doesn't make sense to me to then add another hall on top of that and then a tail reverb on top of that. It's like, that's just too many walls. So I just have one sort of tail reverb to add a longer one and a slightly shorter one, and I find that that works really well for me. The libraries were also recorded in situ, which means where they're seated in an orchestral setup anyway. So that gives a sense of space already in the stereo field. And then the reverb is just like on top of that to sweeten things up. So why really did I go for cinematic rooms? So yes, Trevor Morris suggested or recommended this one to us, but he had this thing that he said, which was, if you're going to invest your money into any plugins, let it be a really nice reverb and a really nice EQ. Now, cinematic rooms sounds really, really great. And before I was using cinematic rooms, I was using the reverbs that come built into Logic. So mostly using Reverb, which I thought sounded pretty nice. There was also Space Designer or Silververb, which are a little older reverbs. Reverb was an algorithmic reverb as well. But when I picked up cinematic rooms, I was honestly shocked at how much better my music sounded compared to when I was using Reverb. I don't know, I still to this day am not sure entirely how it works. I just could tell that this reverb was a little nicer, had a little bit more of a three-dimensional sound compared to Reverb. Reverb served my purposes for, you know, the level that I was at, but cinematic rooms did make everything sound a little bit just nicer. Okay, so let me show you how I have this set up a little bit closer across my template. So let me play you a little bit of this little thing that I'm working on here, and then we'll go into some of these sections and we'll talk about them. Okay, so still a work in progress, but that's just what I have so far. Now, let's listen back to the strings. Let me solo that stack, and then I'll show you what the reverbs are doing here. So, like I mentioned, I have long verb and a short verb. Let's go to the beginning, and you'll hear some short strings. Now let's go to the section where the violins start playing a longer line. There's still short notes happening in the violas, cellos, and basses, but the top two violin parts are playing a legato line. So let's see what that sounds like. And then there's that large shorts section where all of the strings are really just like playing short notes. Okay, so now let's turn the reverb on and off, and then we'll see what the reverb is actually doing here. So why don't we go back to the beginning and see the difference. Okay, so could you tell that when I turned it off, everything sounded a little closer, a little, like more upfront? The reverb adds that sense of space, so it makes it feel like things are a little bit further away. Whether or not you prefer that sound on its own, the point is that it sounds cohesive across all of the other instruments. So without that reverb on those instruments specifically, it doesn't quite sit as well with everything else. It also adds just a little bit of a tail. By the way, when you have a reverb set up on a bus send like this, make sure your dry wet mix is set to 100% wet. And then the way you control the wetness to what you're busing to is by changing the send amount here. So if I wanted the shorts to be 100% wet, I would put it to 0. And now that it feels a lot longer. So let's dial it back. So that to me sounds like it gives a good amount of the sense of space, doesn't overwhelm the musical material that's happening, but still gives it a little bit of zhuzh. Now let's check out the longs. And especially with samples, I find, because what sample libraries are is a collection of a ton of really small audio files. They're very high quality, small audio files. But when you play a note back on an instrument, you're triggering a certain audio file and then it ends. Usually it ends after the tail end of the recording of the audio file happens. But when you go from one to the other, occasionally it just can sound like audio files are coming in and out. And adding a little bit of a reverb just can sort of connect one note against another a little bit nicer. So not only does it put it in a space, but it sort of can like mask those sort of just natural things that happen with a sample library. Again, we can change the send amount because the reverb is 100% wet. You control how much you want to send to it with this. So let's play around with that a little. I find that amount quite pleasing. Okay, let's check out the next section, which is just like pure short notes across the board, really loud. So we'll see how the reverb is affecting it. Again, doesn't overwhelm it, but it does add a larger amount of space to the sound. Now, another difference I have between these two is the long verb here on the left. Yes, it's longer. So this is 2.6 seconds long, and then the short verb is 1.4 seconds long. But I also have a different mix when it comes to reflections versus the reverb. So you see on here in the plugin, there's a reflections section that controls like the initial sound as it would be reflecting off of the walls. And then the reverberation is how that sound continues as it continues bouncing around in the space. So for the longer reverb, I have it more towards the reverb side rather than the reflection side. And for the short verb, I have it a little closer to the reflection than I do for the longer verb. Additionally, there's this section called the pre-delay. Now the pre-delay can be a very powerful tool for you to use as you're either whether you're more serious about your mixing or you're just trying to get like your reverb sound really dialed in. What the pre-delay is sort of the amount of time it takes for the reverb to sort of kick in after the initial sound. So the pre-delay I have here is around 20 milliseconds, which I think is about a little bit more than the time of this initial preset. But then for the short verb, the pre-delay is just a little bit higher at 35 milliseconds. The idea here is that you hear a little bit more of the articulation of a short note before you start to hear it again as a reverberant sound. And then bloom here is the peak amount of sound of that reverberation. So I have a little bit more of a bloom here in the long verb than I do in the short verb, just again so that that sound doesn't overwhelm the sound of a lot of short notes just happening over and over again in a sort of motor. Okay, now I don't treat every single section like this, so let's check out the choir. There's a large choir section in here, and I'm using, what the heck? I'm using a different preset, and this one, I guess I've called Dreamy Vocal, is much longer. Look at that, 4.29 seconds, pure reverb, long pre-delay actually. And let's see what this sounds like. I'm gonna solo the choir this time. You hear that really long decay there because of the 4.30 seconds. So the idea here is that in my imaginary orchestral ensemble playing this back, the choir is behind everything. Not only behind the orchestra or the percussion section, but behind, like mixing wise, just behind all of the instruments. So it adds a little something, but still doesn't feel as upfront because not everything can like be super close. If you think about the way an orchestra is set up, the strings are in the front, then there's the woodwinds, and then sort of behind them and to the side are the brass. Behind all of them is percussion section, and if there's a choir, they're in a large like area even behind the orchestra. So there's a sense of distance front to back and not just where things are left to right. And this is sort of trying to like make it feel like that. And I think it really works in tandem with everything else. So now let's listen to the full mix. I'm gonna turn this reverb on and off for the choir. Now, I don't know if you get that sense. When I turned the reverb off, it almost felt like the choir was muddying up the sound of the brass there. And because the brass has a little bit less reverb than the choir does, it felt just more on top of each other. Adding the reverb separated the choir out to the rest of everything else. So that can be a powerful way that you can utilize reverb to just improve the depth of your mix. Let's talk about percussion. So percussion, this has an intense section, and so I have this chamber preset pulled up with some reflection, a little towards the reverb, decent amount of pre-delay, a little bit of bloom too, but a chamber compared to a hall is like just much smaller, so the reflections and reverberation is quicker. So let's see what that sounds like on and off. Again, you can prefer the way that things sound listening to it solo, but what really matters is the way that it sounds in tandem with everything else. So this kind of just adds a little bit of further distance than the primary instruments like the strings, woodwinds, and the brass, which in an orchestral setup are in front of them. Let me show you briefly what the brass looks like. So longer reverb, pre-delay is around 30 seconds, bloom of 4, a little bit more towards the reverb side, and then the short verb, much shorter, a second and 20, a little bit less reverberation, longer pre-delay, and a shorter bloom. Let's see what that sounds like. So I'm trying to maintain that sense of the initial attack in this sort of, more heroic sounding section. But again, I'm not trying to overwhelm the sound with so much reverberation. It just adds space, it adds depth, it adds a little bit more of that cinematic quality, which, by the way, it can help the music sound a little bit more separated compared to dialogue and sound effects, because when it's mixed together with a bunch of things, typically dialogue is much drier, sound effects are meant to exist in the world of the film. Music does not typically exist within the world of the movie that you're watching or something. It's sort of more of like this larger than life entity that is following the story. So it's adding a little bit more reverb lets it like sit quite well compared to dialogue and sound effects. If your orchestra is very dry, it can tend to compete with the drier dialogue and sound effect sounds. So just something to keep in mind as well. Okay, so this is the website, Liquid Sonic's website. This is Cinematic Rooms. You can see here that it retails for $400. This is for Cinematic Rooms Professional. I did not pick it up at that price. I was in college when I took Trevor's mentorship, and that Black Friday, I picked up Cinematic Rooms Standard Edition, which that one goes for $200. And during that Black Friday sale that I bought it at, it was much less than $200. So that's the one that I went for. Then a year later, I picked up the Professional Edition at that prorated sort of like upgrade discount, because it just splits the difference of $200. So to upgrade to the Professional Edition would have been $200 because that's the difference. But then it was Black Friday again, so it was cheaper than that. So I upgraded for a little bit less. So I don't know how much I ended up paying. I can't remember quite what it was. If you're thinking of doing the same thing and you were like me and didn't have $400 available to spend on a reverb, I would do the same sort of thing. Go for the standard, which honestly includes pretty much everything that you have that you need to have a really great sound. The default preset that comes up, the Amethyst Hall, is the one that I use across each of these, except for the chamber sound and then the choir sound. The rest of the orchestra uses the Amethyst Hall as the starting point, and then I change the decay time or the pre-delay or the bloom depending on which instrument it is. But they're all like that. Now, this is the one that Trevor recommended to us. This is the one that he uses. He does a ton of really professional projects. However, he did recommend another one to us if we didn't feel like spending that much. And he recommended Valhalla Room by Valhalla. Valhalla Room is $50, and it's a really great sounding algorithmic reverb in its own right. I personally don't use it because I decided to go for Cinematic Rooms instead. But if you're looking for a reverb and you want to try all these sort of tricks that I was talking about, check this one out. And if you want a little bit of an upgrade to Chromaverb or whatever your stock reverb plugin is in your DAW of choice. Now, I don't think it has quite the amount of features that Cinematic Rooms has. I don't think you can control reverb in a surround sound setting, much less a Dolby Atmos setting, which Cinematic Rooms can. But you still get a really cool logarithmic reverb that you can easily manipulate in different ways. I'm sure it still has pre-delay. I'm sure it still has the amount of, different things that you can, a ton of different presets that you can select that will give you a concert hall or a smaller sort of stage, everything in between that. So maybe check that out. Oh, and by the way, I have no affiliation with Liquid Sonics or Valhalla. I'm just telling you what was recommended to me, but I'll leave links to all of these options, including the Valhalla room, in the description down below so you can check them out. Okay, so that was me talking about Cinematic Rooms Professional by Liquid Sonics. It's my go-to reverb. I've never felt like I needed a different kind of reverb. There might be other like sort of shimmery reverbs that like a plate reverb or a spring reverb. I consider that sort of different to the spaces that Cinematic Rooms is sort of giving me. So I find it very malleable, very powerful, and it sounds really, really great on my stuff. And so that's why I use it and why I'm not looking for anything else. And thank goodness, because, $400, it better be great. And it is. So maybe check that out or add it to your list of potential, reverbs to pick up if you're looking for one. If you have one that you're using that you really enjoy, leave it down in the comments below for other people to check out and consider as well. But I'm not in the market, so thanks. All right, that's it for this video. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, take care.